Yeah, should I just start?
Oh,
Can people hear me?
Ethan, how's our sound? Definitely.
Sounds good.
Can you turn up your speakers to the?
Turn up the speaker, okay?
Oh, cool. Is that one? Okay. Ethan, can you say something? Or anyone turn on microphone to say something? Probably that's the thing.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good. The speaker sounds good from this side, so that's okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I guess I think one everybody that we are recording. We have already started recording. So we have two talks today. And our first talk is by Alexandre Gay from UC Louvain. And I will give him the floor right now, so please join me in welcoming him.
Hi, thank you all for the invitation. So the work I will present today is a work that I did with my postdoc, Joanne Martins, who now is a full-time researcher for the CNRS. It's a really strange paper. In fact, it's an unpublishable paper, so we put it on the web at a certain time because it became 67 pages. And and it became a novel. And I have to say that most philosophers of biology would say that most of this paper is irrelevant to what they do. But us, as a person interested in philosophy of biology and metaphysics, the relation, Joanne is a philosopher of biology. We think there's a few arguments in this paper that are not maybe important, but they need to be clarified by the philosopher of biology. But I don't think they will do it because they don't care. Okay, so the structure of the paper will be in 4 sections. First, I will present an introduction of the problems. After that, I will discuss really classical metaphysics, substantial versus non-substantial individuation properties. After that, I will attack the main problem, individual pluralism in biology. I will propose 4 ontological interpretations. I will say that they are all bad, and concluding remarks. First, introduction. First, just point of vocabulary, because we differ in the vocabulary between people. When I say a thing or an entity, it's the more general category. Everything is a thing, every property is an entity, blah, blah, blah. When I say something is an object, I mean that I need a much more stringent identity criterion. Sometimes there's some asymmetry of ontology between an object and its properties. And when I say an individual, when I say an individual, it's even a more restrictive category. I like the fact that you're talks. We don't have that in Europe that talks. So so the bigger category things or entities, smaller objects, and even smaller, even more restrictive individuals. So an individual is it depends how you define individual, but usually it's a concrete particular, it's something on which we can quantify, it's something on which we can count. But what is an individual in biology and physics? That's a question of philosophy, so I won't say here what is an individual, just that it is more restrictive than the category of objects. Okay? Why biological individuals are important for metaphysics? Because these are the main examples of what is an individual in all the history of philosophy, at least Western philosophy. Paradigmatic examples of ontological individuals, biological individuals. And when Aristotle used biological individuals, it's not for nothing, okay? It's because that's the interesting case. It's something that changed all its life, but still is the same in a certain sense. So it's not for nothing he didn't take rocks or house or whatever. It's interesting because it's changing, it's alive. So in philosophy of biology, I'm just making some kind of very too strong generalization, but we pass from organism as paradigmatic individuals to, for a certain period, evolutionary units as paradigmatic individuals, all the debate in the 80s and in the 90s. And now we have the new brand. Yeah, kids, all of them are individuals. So we have a more pluralistic vision. And here I took a diagram of Hader and Dr. Smith, but you can find pluralist conception of individual biology in biological individuals in many, many places in the literatures. Now people say, yeah, there's different kind of individuals in biology. Biology provides different kind of individuals. And basically the question is that, is there something here? Is there something here? And questions are about relations between kinds of individuals. So in this talk, I will study this particular graph, that comes from Hader and Dr. Smith, which is, there's a big category called the biological individuals. Among them is there the physiological individuals, which is organismic, metabolic individuals. There's the evolutionary individuals, and here it's not empty, according to them. There's things here. And they would say, this is metaphysical, it's not just a pragmatic hypothesis, because biology has its own ontology, and it's very important that biology produces some kind of metaphysical claim. And this pluralism is very close to biological practice. So my question, as a philosopher interested in metaphysics, what does it mean, this graph? How can I understand this graph coming from the metaphysical angle? Because that seems an interesting proposition about individuality. Okay. I will first eliminate a few interpretations, and after that, we'll do the real stuff. Is this graph just a pragmatic stance? Is this graph interpreted like these are tools or part of individuation practice in physiology? So if this is the interpretation of this graph, I have nothing to say. Okay, that's purely epistemological. Biologists use these properties to identify stuff on which they can quantify, and there's no ontology there. It's purely epistemological. So if it was the right interpretation of this graph, but I check, Thomas was one of the reviewer of the paper, Thomas Prader, he's against this interpretation. If it was that, us, from the point of view of metaphysics, we would have nothing to say. Okay, Guy, you're just mapping the practice, and that's okay. It's absolutely legitimate. Second possibility, is it just a way to classify properties, not individuals, the thing that the property are applied on, but just classify properties. Already here, it's much more, there's more ontological commitment than in the preceding interpretation, but there's not much commitment, just kinds of properties. Usually they don't say that. They don't want to say it's just kinds of properties and we don't know on what the properties apply. They want to say that biological individuals are different than, let's say, biochemical individuals or biophysical individuals. So the real challenge is to interpret this graph and take what they say seriously. They really mean individuals. This is a proposition about the fact that in the world, there's many kinds of biological individuals, and you can be two kinds at the same time. There's something there, there's something there, something there. So this is the only interpretation I will discuss. The two others are interesting, but it is the only one, the stronger one. Okay? So you see, this is the
This is the plan match. This is where we're going.
Okay. Some old-fashioned metaphysics. So in metaphysics, there's an old tradition that we can identify individuals and we can define individuals using what we call substantial properties, properties that are special. And the distinction between substantial and non-substantial properties or mere properties in metaphysics is central to the question of individuation. It's not that these properties are different per se, it's not that when we identify substantial properties, it's a strong clue that we are talking about an individual. We're touching its essence. A substantival or sortal term, let's say horse or genuine biological individual, typically refers to a given sort of object and sometimes to a substantial kind. And this set of objects share more than superficial or accidental resemblance. They are a category of individuals. So contrary to substantial properties, mere properties do not have these properties. They don't have this effect. So among the properties, we should be able to say, okay, there's some that when I can apply them, I know I'm capturing, I'm quantifying on an individual. Other, I'm not sure on what I'm quantifying when I use this predicate. This is old Aristotelian metaphysics. In more modern metaphysics, we try to associate a criterion of identity to this old thinking of Aristotle. And here I put a classical quote below. A criterion of identity for a sortal term tell us what determines whether or not one thing that the term applies is the same as or numerically identical with another thing that the term applies to. I'm sorry, I'm very tired. Where K is a sortal term, the general form of a criterion of identity will be this. For X and Y are Ks, then X is identical with Y. I'm switching in French, it's weird. Then X is identical with Y if and only if X is RK related to Y. Here RK denotes a certain equivalence relation. So I should not have read it, I should have explained it, okay? So let's imagine you see two things that looks to be part of a rabbit. Okay, you see the ear of a rabbit there and the leg of the rabbit there. Okay, so you see two things, two things that maybe are the same things or maybe not. So you have an equivalence relation, so you have some clear, distinct rules that says this part and this part are the part of the same thing for X, Y, Z reason. Okay, so everything is hidden there. All the information is hidden there. A good criterion of identity will be a criterion of identity that will be clear, not ambiguous, and you can take any objects and say if they are the same or not. What was that? Oh.
Robot.
Oh, it's still the robot.
Turn it on.
Okay. The robot disliked to talk. Interesting. So the main purpose of a criterion of identity is to specify the different transformations, because you can use it for a different part of the rabbit, but also the rabbit now and the rabbit in the future. If this equivalence relation is well built, you will be able to identify it's the same thing or not. Okay. So biological individuals, you have to find, according to this understanding of individuality, the right property, the natural kind properties, that will be able to identify an individual throughout its life. Usually, we would think that in biology it must be some kind of functional relations, some kind of tabletic relation, other kinds of relation, but something related to the science of biology that can help us to re-identify the same individual through time, or identify different parts of an individual to the same individual. And there's even Wilson in 1999 in a book called Biological Individuals, had an even stronger case. He was saying, okay, every biological individual must belong to a substantial kind, so he was completely behind that, but he was going farther. There are several substantial kinds in biology, and every biological individual must belong to exactly one of them. I will not defend this, it's much stronger, and in the paper, if you are interested, we have a critique of this. I will concentrate for now on this one. Okay. But if you buy that, people will say, oh, you're a substantialist. Substantialism is bad in biology. So what is the alternative? So let's discuss a few alternatives before continuing. So you could say, substantialist individual is too strong, or it's not what we need in biology. Why? Because every entity must belong to a kind or other at some point of its existence, while denying that every entity must belong to a substantial kind for the whole duration of its existence. People could say, yeah, biology, we transform a lot. The transformations are so diverse that we cannot have a re-identification criterion that strong. Okay? In this case, one would then have to accept the existence of bare particles. Okay. But if you still claim that something keeps its identity, even if it loses substantial properties, or any properties that define what this entity is. Oh, I'm out of the camera. What this entity is, it's because implicitly you define something that identity is beyond properties. Okay? This is never acknowledged. This is super weird. If you say that the identity of a thing, I repeat, because this is something I'm often surprised with philosopher biology. If you say that there's still identity of a thing, without saying that this identity is related to some properties that I can measure or are the same, it's because you think that identity goes beyond properties, and it's what Aristotle called bare identity, bare individual. And that means that you automatically put biology outside, you put ontology of biology outside science, because this is not measurable. If you say that, okay, I'm repeating a third time because it's really important, that I can completely change my property, but I'm still me. Science has nothing to say about that, because there's nothing to. So maybe it's true metaphysically, but that if you buy that, the cost will be that identity in biology will not be part of science. Some quantum mechanics people say maybe we have to buy that because quantum mechanics is weird, but it's the last resort. It's because they try everything else. We should not maybe buy this too fast. Okay. Second alternative to substantialist claim. We can conceiving of biological individuals as mere bundles of tropes, where a trope refers to a particular property that is supposed in space and time, but that is not actually supported by any particular bare objects. So that's a popular, bizarre position in metaphysics where properties float. They are not properties of something, they just are properties. So there's a bundle of properties somewhere, and that's the biological individual. So trope theory, unfortunately, cannot explain why some property, specifically the biological one, have or seem to have, at the very least, the power of unifying a large number of properties into specific patterns or bundles. So one of the difficulties of the trope theory is that it's so weak, but it's weak on design. It's been designed like that. It's so weak that
the level of integration of individuals in biology and functional integration is so high that it seems that it cannot be captured by trope theory. So maybe we are wrong about that, but it seems that the trope theory is too weak to capture the identity of biological individuals. For example, if you want to discuss, is the bacteria in your gut inside of you or not part of the individual or not, it's not clear to me that if you adopt bundle theory, you will have anything to say. It's too weak. The third one is process theory. You say, but it's not substance, Alexandre. It's obvious, and how many times Dupré explained that to me? You don't understand. It's all process. and I have to say that this paper was really painful at that point because I defended process ontology in at least a few publications, and I destroy everything I wrote in these few next slides, unfortunately. Okay, so let's imagine, okay, substantialist does not work because in fact these are not bearer of properties individuals, biological individuals are processes. Okay, so what is a process? It's not simple, there's no consensus, but I can say a few basic things for my argument. At the metaphysical level, a process can be characterized as a four-dimensional entity. I use entity here because there's no clear criteria of identity for process now. So I use the more general category, whose temporal parts or stages are connected by a continuous series of causal steps. What determines whether different temporal parts can be considered as stage of the same causal process is primarily the nature of their causal relations. And typically, and my work was about gen identity. So I tried to define with Thomas Pradeux this kind of criterion that guarantee the identity of an individual biological individual through a process. And gen identity is different than identity because it does not respect the classical low criterion. It's because it's not transitive. So it's a much weaker notion of identity. So you think, okay, we have it. Okay, now it's a process. We have a weaker notion of identity, but okay, we can live with that if it saves the theory of biological individuality. So the consequence of this fact, of this weaker notion of identity, is that two distinct processes can perfectly overlap in time if they have identical temporal parts at this time. When it happens, the two processes can be said to be identical, at least for this stage. There's a few problems with this approach a few problems. I will now destroy my own papers. First problem, a process is made of temporal parts or stages. This implies that in order to identify a given process at the time, one should be able to identify its unique temporal part at that time. Yeah, if I'm in the flux and I say, this is the horse, this is this horse, I have to say, okay, this horse at this time is this horse. It's not another horse, it's not an horse, it's this horse. One should be able to identify its unique temporal part at that time. But how do we do that? The short answer is that we don't. We just have already the process and we say, this horse is this horse. I have no way, I never found a way not to do that in a circular manner. If you give me a bunch of processes that interlink, I have no idea how to say this one and this one are different. Maybe possible, I don't say the contrary. At least Whitehead was claiming it was possible, but I don't understand Whitehead yet. First objection. Objection 2, and these you will recognize, these are the famous Hull diagram, David Hull's diagram. Two distinct processes might share in principle any number of their parts, in which case they should be said to be partially identical, I have those parts. If they share all their parts, there is no way to distinguish them. How, during a shared interval, should we distinguish? So here, for example, Hull says there's two different individuals that become another one. And this one, there's two individuals that exchange, this is, for example, blood transfusion, that exchange things but keep their identity. They are still the same. Topologically, okay, for example, one individual divide, one cells divide, one tree continues but create another tree. How to distinguish this from this? Yeah, my papers about this subject is to say, yeah, here there's a breaking of the organization, blah, 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 completely, and here most of the organizations stay the same, but these are very, very vague terms. You don't have an identity criterion that will survive, because you won't be able to say, okay, there's a tree, it's losing its branch, it's the same tree. Or there's a tree, there's a cell, it's dividing, it's not the same cells. How? On what basis? We have an intuition, it's based about organization, continuations, but it's not clear. And just imagine, these are simple cases. Just imagine butterfly transformation, very heavy. Most animals have a very complicated cycle of reproduction. The process ontology will be a mess. It won't be. So maybe in the future, process ontology will work, but for now, it's not satisfying. Okay, how am I doing in time?
We've been going for 28 minutes.
Oh my God, I'm so fast. No, sorry. So, is there some clarification question? Because that was the abstract part, old metaphysics. It's known, but sometimes we forget about it after a bachelor degree. Okay, let's go back to our graph. Okay, so now we have this idea of substantialist properties, and we want to interpret this graph. So it's not very complicated, there's four possibilities. Or neither PI or EI, so neither physiological properties or evolutionary properties refer to individuating properties. It means that these are properties that are predicated on already individuated individuals. Or we take a stronger version, all of them are genuine individuals, or only the physiological one are individuals and the other are not, or only the evolutionary are really individuals and the other are not. Let's look at each of these interpretations one by one. The first one to say is that neither physiological properties or evolutionary properties are real individuating properties. They are just accident. So they are real properties, but they are properties predicated on already individuated biological individuals. You have the set of biological individuals, and you can say those with these properties have this evolutionary properties, those with these properties have this physiological. One of the difficulty of this approach is to define what would be a biological individual independently of physiological or evolutionary properties. We believe there are four ways to discuss this problem. First, we say, common sense gives you cut the world in part, and after that you study. On the other hand, it's difficult to claim that common sense goes beyond epistemological consideration. And I don't believe some biologists would really be really impressed with if you say that your basic way to separate individuals before studying biology is common sense. Maybe epistemologically it's a good thing, but metaphysically it seems not interesting. The other one is to have an individuating property like being alive. You have alive things, among them there's certain physiological properties and certain other evolutionary properties. One of the main difficulty of this is that it's very difficult to define life without talking about functional properties. So without talking about evolutionary properties or physiological properties or functional integration, except if you buy something like, I have a blank, the weird people in the 19th century, like it's alive because it has a vitalism or something like that. Okay, so that seems difficult. There's another possibility is to say, okay, we look at in another discourse for the structure, and after that, biology come after. So it is very tempting to say that the real individuals in the world are physico-chemical structure, and biology is just exploring this field of already defined physical structure, and says, okay, this one is a biological individual, this one is a rock. One of the difficulties that is usually underestimated is that we don't know any good identity criterion for material and physical structure objects. At best, we have criteria of identity for basic particles or things like that. But for structure, we don't. Maybe it's a problem of philosophy of physics or metaphysics, but this is quite uncomfortable, because if you say another discipline will divide reality in individuals and we will study what is over, it's not obvious that this other discipline can do it. Or you say, okay, let's get rid of that. And there are simply no such thing as material object, aggregates, or biological individuals. And we say that at no point in this graph, nothing here is an individual at all. So we don't talk about the individuals anymore. It was a mistake. We talk about other stuff. So as we can see, these, whoops. Okay. My computer is doing strange thing. Oh, the slides are moving suddenly. Okay. So as we can see, these are not impossible. These are all possible answers, but they are not very satisfying to say that biology is able to produce its own ontology. Okay, so let's explore another option. So both PI, physiological individuals, and epistemological physiological properties and evolutionary property are substantialist properties. They are a sign of individuals. Okay, so they define a good criterion of identity, blah, blah, blah. The difficulty is what is these, okay? Imagine that you have a single individuals, X1, that is both kind of individuals at a certain time. But later, these individuals, what did I write? Later, these individuals, which one? This individual become, let's say, not an evolutionary individuals or not a physiological individual. It loses certain properties, but keep the other. Is it the same thing? And that's a complicated question because it's a yes or no. It's yes and no. Because if these properties are constitutive of the identity of the thing, okay, they are the way we use to re-identify the thing through times, and you lose it, you're not the same thing. But on the other hand, you would be the same thing if you keep the other one. How will you build a criterion of identity that could, even if you lose what we could call an essential properties, you're still the same? An essential type was a substantial properties, you're still the same. This is not an obvious problem. This is not an obvious problem. So we have to find a way for this to make sense. Because in metaphysics, if you lose one of the properties that define the fact that you are this individual, you cannot be the same, by definition. So you have to find a way to accommodate that. One of the possibilities is to say we are facing constitutive properties. So if you remember your Aristotle, there's the sculpture and there's the marble of the sculpture, and there's two identities at the same place of the same thing, but they are different in a certain way. The marble is different than the form of the sculpture. So you try to find a way to accommodate these change and keep identity. So a possible way of salvaging interpretation 2 would be to reject the assumption that the substantial property associated with the natural kind necessarily constitutive of the substance of its member. In other words, an inference from kind essence to individual essence is invalid. In consequence, no identity criterion based on empirical properties can capture the notion of biological identity. So a way to make it metaphysically sound is to say that these are not, we go from property to individuality, and we say, okay, we break this notion, we break this classical substantialist position, that it's possible to change properties and keep individuality. So we don't do such a strong if-then, such a strong inference from having such certain properties be this specific individuals. But the cost is very heavy. Because now, if the individual here lose this property, but still is the same because of these, it means that at least part of the identity of an individual is not empirical. It's empirical for these properties, but since now you're not there, you're here, it means that losing or having these properties is not essential to be this individual. So it's not accessible. It's something like a bare identity, hidden. So again, it makes the ontology of biology, at least part of it, a smaller part than before, not accessible by science, which is, maybe it's not bad, but it seems to me bad. Third interpretation is that only physiological individuals are real individuals. And in fact, it's just a new version of the old one. Organisms are individual, physiological integration is par excellence an individuating properties, and evolutionary properties are important, of course, but they are not pointing towards the identity of a biological individual. Biological individuals is something like physiological integration. Okay, how to develop a robust notion of functional integration? The kind of properties that will be able to say, this is this individual, this is this individual, without relying on evolutionary basis. So here is the main objection that we saw 30 years ago when we passed from physiological individuals to evolutionary units, because people says all important physiological integration properties are understood through the lens of evolution. But if you say that, let's continue to entertain the possibility. So there's an epistemological difficulty. How do you define what is physiologically important to be an individual without referring to evolution? And there's also an ontological difficulty. What is the status of physiological individuals that are not evolution individuals? So what is the status of a thing that has just the right functional integration to be called a physiological individual, but does not evolve? So you don't want to say that everything that seems to have a good functional integration is a biological individual, because you will be stuck to say city or biological individuals, complex structure of biological individuals, system robots or biological individuals, or something like that. So in the literature, usually they restrict physiological integration. They go more restrictive to stay in the biological realm. And one of the classical vision is the one that Thomas Frederick proposed. A biological individual has an immune system. But how to make this definition not circular? How to define properties that is a set of properties that will identify the right biological individuals, not to be typically biological. So how do you know which one are not biological, like functional integrities of a city? And which one should you use to define individuality? Already with immune system, you can ask, are virus biological individuals? Everything that has an immune system, is it a biological individuals? An artificial what's the word for that? Biology, the people building life.
Synthetic biology.
Huh?
Synthetic biology.
Synthetic biology, are they producing biological individuals? That's a tough one. Again, you know, in the paper, we took this graph, the graph that we're discussing. Prader is saying physiological individuality consists in the interaction between bodily components and the regulation of these interactions, particularly through control over variation. And we see where it's coming. It's functional integration biological. But if you use that definition, a colony is an individual, a city is an individual. A simulation of robots is an individual. Okay. Fourth interpretation. Only the evolutionary individuals or biological individuals. Central assumption of this interpretation is merely that being a unit of selection is part of the very substance of any biological individual, which instantiates this property. But this doesn't imply that every unit of selection has to be a biological individual. Okay. So being a unit of selection is dispositional properties. The difficulty here is different, and it's an old one. How do you make sense of individuals inside other individuals? That's a whole methodological problem. And if you buy this interpretation, you have this classical problem to solve. How could you, because identity of the thing, and you have a part of the thing that has its own identity, the thing could go out, but do you still is the same? That's pretty complicated. But we have also a general objection against the last two.
I remind to you, the third was only physiological individuals. Physiological property refers to individuating properties. The fourth was only evolutionary properties individually. We have a general objection against these two. The objection goes as follows. Let's add up one for the argument. Some physiological individuals have, let's imagine that we have physiological individuals that have also evolutionary properties. What is the status of entities that are not physiological individuals but still have evolutionary properties? Because there must be some outside the diagram. Are they at least biological individuals, or they are just things that are unit of selection but are not biological individuals? And that would be weird. That the thing can be countable, can evolve, and it's not an individual. And you can do exactly the reverse argument. Something that is a unit of selection, but something else has very strong physiological integration and is not an individual. Why? Why those are not individuals, but the one that are unit of selection, only these with almost the same physiological properties are individuals. So, as you can see, all options are complicated. Conclusion. Does the pluralist diagram provide us with a consistent partition of biological individual and how do I pronounce that? Envisage. Envisage as discrete three-dimensional particular? The answer is no. All ontological interpretation meets serious difficulties. Shall we adopt a pure pragmatic stance? Maybe. Okay. On the other hand, that would be a shame. Of course, if you say, okay, I'm only studying practices, I'm a philosopher of science and practice, I think you can adopt a pragmatic stance very comfortably, and it would be consistent with your methodology, and that would be okay. However, it would be a shame that all David Hull, all these philosophers that said biology has its own ontology, Wimsatt, etc. And biology is not just physics, and there's something here about the way the world is structured in biology. That would be a shame, just to abandon the project and just concentrate on the pragmatic stance. So I would like to say to you that biology is the best example of a pluralist ontology, and it's cool and it works, but it makes no sense for now. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Yeah. Oh, we should stop recording.
There's a-
right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I just need to,
Do you want me to do something?
and I should stop recording.
Yeah.